Hi there, and welcome back to this channel if you have been here before, or welcome if you are new. I'm Sándor, and I'm here to talk about my eating disorder recovery and anything else that's related to the topic. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not a medical professional or a therapist. I only talk about my recovery because I believe it can be helpful to hear that other people went through the same stuff you are going through and they came out the other end. Keep in mind that these are just my opinions and experiences. Nothing I say is meant to be prescriptive. Some of the things that work for me could work for you as well, but recovery takes some experimentation, and you need to be in charge of that. Today we are talking about not feeling sick enough to get help for your eating disorder, but before we get into the topic of this video, I have some really exciting news to share. As some of you may know, I've been working toward becoming a certified eating disorder recovery coach at the Caroline Costany Institute, and right now I'm preparing for my internship at the Institute. And for my internship, I'm looking for people who are interested in working with me, interested in working with an eating disorder recovery coach, and would allow me to record the audio for our coaching sessions. So the only person who is going to listen to these recordings is my supervisor in California, so confidentiality is strictly maintained. As a thank you, I'm offering 4 free sessions to each participant, and these sessions will be recorded starting from early to mid-July. I still need one person for this, so if you are interested, please DM me or send me an email to this email address or this email address. I don't know, it will be up here somewhere. Thanks. Alrighty, so let's go back to the actual topic of this video. I think not feeling sick enough or not feeling that your eating disorder is valid is kind of a universal experience for those who deal with an eating disorder. And there are many things that contribute to feeling this way. Some of these contributing things are psychological. So psychological barriers to seeking help are kind of universal. They are not just related to eating disorders. For example, feeling like you might burden others if you ask for help, or having past negative experiences where people weren't there for you and weren't supportive, or being afraid of change, or, feeling ashamed about needing help can all make it difficult to reach out for help, to reach out for support with any serious issue, not just with eating disorders. What I'm trying to say here is, for some of us, it's not easy to ask for help, whether you have an eating disorder or not. But when you do have an eating disorder, you likely have a distorted perception of how severe your symptoms are. You can genuinely believe that your symptoms are not serious enough to get help, or you can be in denial about your symptoms and how much you really need to seek out help. In my own experience, denial is a very convenient, let's call it defense mechanism to avoid facing the reality of your sickness. I experienced this firsthand when I was struggling with my eating disorder because despite exhibiting, symptoms and behaviors that appeared disordered to those around me, I genuinely thought that there was nothing wrong or disordered about these behaviors and symptoms. I just accepted these as a part of life. I thought that these were a normal part of my life. For example, I thought that, it's normal to struggle with maintaining a normal body temperature in the summer, even when I was wearing multiple layers of clothing. I didn't think there was anything wrong with that. I just thought that was my, personal reality. There were these brief moments of clarity when the realization hit me that I was in serious trouble, but I quickly pushed these thoughts out of my mind or just, buried them real deep in my subconscious. Another major psychological barrier to seeking help when people struggle with an eating disorder is perfectionism. So because of this perfectionism and distorted perception, you will likely refuse to seek help unless your symptoms are really extreme. However, due to that very same distorted perception, it is very unlikely that you will see your symptoms as bad enough. And no matter how serious your symptoms become, your eating disorder, due to this perfectionism, will always move the goalpost, and that will make you feel that you will never reach the point of actually needing help. For your eating disorder self, you will never be sick enough to justify seeking help. Let that sink in. Another major thing that will, make you minimize your own struggles is comparing yourself to others who appear, visibly affected or more visibly affected by their eating disorder than you. If there is something your eating disorder self loves doing, that's comparing. And as long as you can find someone who, let's say, is thinner than you, or runs more miles than you, or hasn't had the period longer than you won't feel sick enough to get help. So you compare yourself to this other person who appears to be, worse off than you are, and you convince yourself that things aren't that bad for you, even if they are. Because of this comparison, it's also possible to feel bad about getting help because you are, let's say, afraid of taking up space or resources when there are these other people who are visibly sicker than you. And it's easy to convince yourself that these people are more deserving to get help. I was definitely struggling with not feeling worthy enough or deserving enough or good enough to get help. And I don't know if that applies to you, but I think it applies to many people who struggle with an eating disorder. And, comparing the seriousness of your illness to others is unfortunate because this is where some cultural and social factors come into play and make matters even worse. I'm talking about factors such as the media portrayal of eating disorders, which is inaccurate and sensationalist. I'm mostly talking about how anorexia is usually portrayed in the media. For some reason, we as a society are enamored with, people who have anorexia. Well, probably it's because we are so obsessed with, thinness. Anyway, what I'm trying to say here is only a very small percentage of people with anorexia look like the stereotypical anorexic person portrayed in the media. Most people who deal with anorexia don't look like that. I didn't look like that either. However, this misleading portrayal is perpetuated in the media and especially on social media, and this reinforces this misconception of eating disorders having a specific look. And when you compare yourself to this misleading portrayal, to this misconception of how a person with a specific eating disorder is supposed to look like, no wonder you don't feel sick enough. And I think this is a never-ending cycle because you can check this for yourself, but content on social media that uses these sensationalist, thumbnails or portraying extreme cases of eating disorders will always be and has been more popular. So more people will watch these videos or look at this content, which just keeps perpetuating the same misconception that invalidates your own sickness, and that's a bloody shame. Another reason why it is so easy to minimize our own struggles and just brush it aside is the fact that there is a significant lack of understanding about eating disorders, while many disordered behaviors around food and exercise are normalized in society. People who are not prone to developing an eating disorder can still engage in disordered behaviors around food and exercise and get away with it without hurting themselves. However, if you are prone to developing an eating disorder, you can get away with it, and if you are trying to recover from an eating disorder, these behaviors will likely become recovery sabotaging. So the fact that these behaviors, however disordered they may be, are normalized makes it hard to recognize them as disordered behaviors because so many people are, engaging in them. I'm talking about behaviors such as skipping a meal or counting calories or, weighing yourself or engaging in any other form of body checking. So this normalization and the fact that a lot of people engage in these behaviors blurs the line between healthy and disordered and makes it even harder to recognize that you have a problem. There is still a significant stigma associated with mental health problems in general, not just with eating disorders. And this stigma can, lead to feelings of guilt and shame, and it can make you worry about being judged or misunderstood by others. And that stigma also won't help you when it comes to reaching out for help for eating disorder. That stigma will do the opposite. It will make you convince yourself that you are not sick enough to get help. And unfortunately, you may not be the only one who thinks that you are not sick enough to get help. This perception can also extend to the mental health profession and insurance companies. The mental health field got a lot better at diagnosing and understanding eating disorders and a lot of other mental health issues, but the diagnosis is still based on the diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5, and if you don't meet these criteria, you may not receive a formal diagnosis. And if you don't get a formal diagnosis, your insurance provider may refuse to cover the treatment of your eating disorder, which is very invalidating and damaging because this will further reinforce the idea that you are not sick enough to need help. So I just wanted to say that your diagnosis, or lack thereof, doesn't invalidate your illness. The diagnostic criteria for eating disorders are not perfect and they are not set in stone. They keep revising it as they issue, new versions of the diagnostic manual. And just because you don't meet the diagnostic criteria, that doesn't mean that you don't deserve help. I think it's important to highlight that the diagnostic criteria were established by professional bodies, based on the knowledge we have about a mental health issue, the knowledge that's available at the time. Our understanding, or more like the mental health field's understanding of mental health issues, continues to evolve, but integrating this new knowledge, spreading the word and making sure that all mental health professionals are aware these new understandings, knowledge, and development takes time. For instance, the mental health field still relies on BMI when it comes to discussing eating disorders, despite its limitations and the growing understanding that BMI is a useless metric and it does not reflect the complexities of these disorders accurately. Actually, I'd like to ask you to do that. Just Google how the BMI was constructed and what was it used for originally, so you can see it for yourself, how ridiculous and pointless it is to associate it with health or eating disorders. I know how hard it can be to disregard the BMI and let go of what we think about the importance of the BMI, because I never had my BMI dip into the underweight range, even when, I was visibly sick. I actually tried to recover on my own before I got diagnosed, but the only thing I managed was to gain weight. And by the time I saw a psychiatrist, my BMI has returned to the normal range and I was no longer visibly emaciated. Do you think I felt better just because I gained weight? No, quite the opposite. I struggled even more because I just couldn't cope with the weight gain and my body changing. Do you think I felt less deserving of treatment? Absolutely, because I was no longer visibly sick and my BMI was no longer bordering on underweight. And that itself, not feeling sick enough, is a symptom of having an eating disorder. Feeling like you're not sick enough is, it indicates that there is a part of you, a healthy part of you, that recognizes that you are struggling with an illness. However, there is another part of you, a disordered part of you, that will continually try to convince you not to get help, regardless of how sick you become. As I said, the goalpost always moves and you will likely never feel sick enough to get help. I'm sure you don't want to hear this, and I'm not saying this because I want to do some, good old fear-mongering, but the more time you spend with your eating disorder, the more ingrained your behaviors will become. So you will have a harder time when you try to unlearn these behaviors and replace them with healthier ones. Chances are, the longer you have an eating disorder, the longer it will take to recover. The more time you spend struggling with an eating disorder, the more likely that you will do some irreversible damage to your body. At the end of the day, the decision to seek help is yours to make. No one can convince you to do so if you don't want to. But consider this. If you had a physical illness that could potentially become life-threatening and could cause irreversible damage to your body, Would you wait until you are in the ICU before seeking help, or would you act at the first sign of trouble? Feeling that you are not sick enough to get help is not the first sign of trouble. It's a sign that you are already in trouble. I guess the take-home message of this video is not feeling sick enough to get help is an eating disorder symptom, and you will likely never feel sick enough to get help because your eating disorder self will always move the goalpost. You will always find someone, who looks sicker or appears to have it worse than you do. So your eating disorder self will be there to convince you not to reach out for help. So I don't know who needs to hear this today, but your sickness is valid and you deserve help. That's it for this video. Subscribe to the channel or like the video if you would like to see more content from me. And as always, I hope you will have a great day, or at least a reasonable one, if you are going through something difficult.